We'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity, and we're going through the white paper library, and we've been through phase one, learning to think differently, and then we've been through two, the income machine, and so phase three is life passion, life vision, passions, leverage, and a whole lot more. And so hopefully you really nailed that life vision and discovering your life vision through your passion circle. Seeing and being, man, is this a crazy one? Well, it's been a while since I've put this one together. And it was a season of life that I was in that I was really focused in on what am I missing in my life? Like, and then how do I be? So when I looked over the different pieces, it was really interesting to go ahead and look at the white paper and everything that was in here. I'm like, my gracious, it's overwhelming. Carol, your thoughts on it?
I liked what I read, but like I said earlier, on when I get to those papers that you're drawing graphs and stuff on, it's like, yikes, my head.
Right? And so, you know, seers, are seekers of the truth.
Right.
And so often that's the driver personality. The other three often not so much. I love the gap jumpers. They're the ones that don't have to have the data, don't know if they're going to land, they're crashed, they're high risk takers. That's the driver of the expressive. The bridge builders are the amiable and the analytic. So every bridge builder needs a gap jumper, and every gap jumper needs bridge builders, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then in seeing and being, you know, um, it's almost like I don't know, would I still agree with that? I mean, seeing it seems to me that the driver is a big seer. This last week I was watching a show on Netflix. It was interesting, and they said that anxiety is always worried about the future, and depression is always focused on the past. And I'm like, huh, that's pretty interesting. When we look at, what is my first step in becoming a seer or a bridge builder, like going through these. Like my dad is a pastor, and so I've been to church my whole life. One of the things that frustrates me about church, it seems like you just go through a message one after another, and you go ahead and I don't know, hopefully you get motivated by the sermon, but what do you do with it? Come next week, you come back to another sermon. It seems like a lot of it's temporal, superficial, surface. It's not going deep. And then people say, well, that's what small groups are for. And it's like, are they? Do people really want to go deep? It's almost being is, I don't know, going deep. And so here's an interesting one. This is going in this from years ago from my journal, which I shared with Cheryl at the Coffee Connection. I always do this during church. She says, how do you listen to the sermon? I'm like, I don't know. It just happens. So here's a model, of the future, the present, the short term, and the past. So and then the different personalities that tend to resonate with these different things. And then there's frequency levels too. And this is a really great white paper. The questions on it. See, this is interesting. We'll make mistakes and learn. The driver and the expressive often will not make mistakes, can't learn. So the analytic will often fear doing the wrong thing, so they won't do something. They make a mistake, but they don't know they make the mistake.
Mhm.
Amiable is afraid of conflict, so they often won't try risky things. So these two personalities make just as many mistakes as these two personalities. They just make the mistake and you don't know you make the mistake. And if you don't, then you don't learn.
Right.
Oh, really interesting here. I'd forgotten about this piece. Why don't people see? Which is connected back in, could be connected back in to the clean windows. This is how white paper should be. So many questions. Oh, here's the one from What Does Every Woman Want? That's a good one. I mean, it's almost like every week, like you could spend 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years on any one of these white papers. Questions?
No.
So, yeah, I'd forgotten about this one here too. And it's what I'm still facing, still struggling with. Why won't people learn? This is when it gets interesting, where it goes into all these other models, some of them decades in the making. So here's a short version, like speed dating, you know. So it's like speed dating. Here's, speed coaching or so this is the conflict resolution model, the four-step conflict resolution model that came from the Jerusalem Project, I don't know, 22 years ago. This is Six Steps to Overcoming Blindness, James McDonald. This is the, walls of opportunities. This is the frequency. This is dimensions. This is four levels. Here's the here's a quantum look breaking this thing up. These things, man, were they hard to develop. And then that all connects back into there. And this is a dimensional gap. I was just talking to Mary Jo about this yesterday, I believe. Here's defensiveness. Still cannot get people to get rid of that. It's crazy. Learning to do the truth. Oh, this is from when I was 8 years old with my grandfather.
Which one was that?
When my grandfather said, Mark, there's some amount of truth. It could be 1% to 99%. It's up to you
Oh,
to decide. So that's learning to do the truth. That's 1% to 99%. So faith helps us do the leap. It's interesting. This is where I'm talking. See, Cheryl, this is what I'm talking about in the church service. A pastor will be talking about, we shouldn't have fear, we should have faith, we should have all these things. But can that same pastor have faith about something simple? The answer is no, he can't.
right.
I mean, you know, are you willing to go on a 30-minute, podcast? I mean, you just call in. You don't go anywhere. Well, what's it about? Who's it going to go to? Well, what's this? Well, I don't know. I'll have to think about it. It's 30 minutes for crying out loud. Like, and you don't risk anything, but a pastor can't have faith about something so simple, but they'll get up and preach for decades and think nothing of it and talk about how you give all this money and have faith. You can't outgive God, all this kind of stuff. And you ought to do this and everything's fine. But that pastor cannot go ahead and do a 30-minute podcast. It's just crazy. And nobody will call him out on it. Why?
Okay, come here.
Because they fear the pastor.
Right.
And
Okay.
so fear equals danger, which equals enslavement. And so people are enslaved. So they don't want to know the truth. They just don't.
Okay,
Oh,
but do you feel like okay, bear with me while I try to explain this. When when I go to church, I I hope and pray that the pastor will preach on something that will help me.
yeah, I don't do that.
Why not?
Uh, when do you pray that?
On the way to church in the morning when I wake up,
He's
knowing I'm
already
going to
got
go
his
to church.
preparation. He's already got what he's going to preach about. So maybe a more effective prayer is whatever comes out of the pastor's mouth, whatever he's preaching on, that God would somehow translate that into what, not that he's going to preach something that benefits you, but whatever he's preaching, that the Holy Spirit will translate that and help you get something significant from that.
True.
Something you can actually do something, not feel. I think that's what people go to church to do is feel. Why? Because they're not feeling anything during the week. And they don't realize that, it's like going, you might as well go to I mean, I'm a little, Mary Jo yesterday, there's still a remnant. She went ahead and said, wow, the 12 o'clock call yesterday, I went down afterwards, we're talking to her and she's like, wow, she says, people were a little sassy there. Like, wow. So there's more now today, Mary Jo, than there was yesterday.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. And so other questions. So the do, the do is what it is. It's like that's where it happens. That's where you're humbled and you're like, whatever worked, whatever I was taught, whatever I thought, whatever was preached about, whatever I learned. Like the do is where, that's where, did it happen or did it not happen? People want to feel significant without being significant, without doing things that create the being. And it's so frustrating. It's just, urgh.
Is there a way to get them to see that?
Not that I'm aware of. I mean, yesterday when I was with Alvin, I explained the different personalities and how they all are in idolatry and they remake God in their own image and they worship themselves and they don't even realize it. And no pastor will ever go ahead and preach that, ever. Why? Because the truth will set the free, and the pastors they don't want the congregation free. They just don't. Why? Because then they wouldn't need the church. They wouldn't need the pastor. That's what the pastor is afraid of. So if you think you know a pastor, if you're listening to this and you think you know a pastor who's different than this, have them call or text me 630-393-9909. That's 630-393-9909. Because I'd bet money they won't. It's absolutely being a pastor's kid, a missionary's kid, being around pastors my whole life, knowing people who know literally thousands of pastors, and they are the most terrified people. They are the most fearful people on the planet. It's unbelievable. It's sad, but it makes sense when you think about it. Why is the American church in the reason it is? Like, why? Because a fish rots from the head down. And that's what happens. And so when a pastor does marriage counseling or the church pastor helps a church or the church or the pastor helps somebody and the marriage is saved, everybody's jumping up and down. Look at what the church did. There's testimonials and it's like, oh my goodness. But when a marriage collapses, you don't find the pastor, you don't find the church saying that something's wrong. You just don't. You do not. So they take all the credit, and none of the responsibility. And that's a recipe for disaster. And because there's a lot of money to be made from the congregation, you don't get anybody, nobody's going to, you can't talk like I talk. Pastors aren't going to hear me and say, I want Mark Boersma to come and preach or to share, to talk in my church. They just won't. They don't want to be anywhere around me. It's okay. Because the feeling's kind of mutual. They're just terrified. And I get why. They're afraid they're going to be exposed. They're afraid they're going to be exposed as the imposters that they are. And what's sad is if they just acknowledge their fear and humbled themselves, what would happen? Here are things where these are a ton of natural laws. Like this is from over 30 years ago. And this is the original 530 grid, a bit more complicated than it is now. And then there's a bunch of stuff here. So there's all these natural laws, all these models from the journal. Oh, the middle principle. I love that. We're all surrounded by people. And the rule states that we can't be any more effective and efficient than the people around us. So if we're surrounded by weak, inefficient, ineffective people, then we too will be weak, inefficient, and ineffective. And it's funny when you share that with people, they're like, oh my gracious, that makes sense. That's why I'm not efficient and effective, because people around me. And what they forget to realize well, you're around other people and they're thinking about you the same way that you're thinking about them. But we care more about the relationship than we do about the people, so we don't say anything. There is so much packed into here. Like right here, there are probably over 100 podcasts. Like every single one of these could be its own separate podcast. This thing is just cool. Going into very DNA, RNA, like, oh my goodness, in our belief system, where it comes from. And then fear. This is the Mach 1 principle. This is the foxhole principle. This is worldviews. So 3 worldviews is fix myself, fix my family, fix my community, fix the country, fix the world. But that's most of the worldview now is, fix my world. Everybody else has issues. I don't. So I'm going to fix everybody else. And the church is like that too. It just is. It's unbelievable. You go to a good church, Bible preaching church, like, yeah, preaches the word of God. But over a third of the messages are how good we are and how bad the world is. Just goofy. Just goofy. Here's the next dimension. Lots of stuff here. Man, this thing's wild. This is the one to go ahead and for rescuing girls at risk and girls that are in the being trafficked. This shows on how you can take pain and turn it into energy. Crazy amounts of energy. And man, is that a great one. I don't know. After we get through all the white papers, do we go through on these different ones here? and tell the story behind every one of these natural laws. There's over 500. Oh, this one's just precious. The learnability model. That one. Yeah, that one's over 15 years old easily. A lot of stuff here. Anybody else have anything else?
I don't have anything.
All right. So next week, make sure you go ahead dimensional living. So make sure you read that on your own without being reminded. Get buddies to do it. And always remember we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye bye.